Welcome. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Atari at 52. This is super fun. This is like a great pleasure for us. It's a super honor. As you can see, the honor is that we have Ethan Stearns here. No, I'm just kidding. Yep.
Thank you. I'll be doing signings at the booth later.
We super want to welcome Nolan Bushnell here.
Oh, come on. Keep it coming. No.
All right, and he doesn't need an introduction, but I'm going to give you one anyway, right? Nolan co-founded Atari in 1972 and helped launch the modern video game industry. His early iteration of the company proved that coin-operated video games were a potential goldmine with groundbreaking games like, and you know them, you can yell them out, Pong, Asteroids, Missile Command, and lots of others. Interspace. There you go. Yeah, fill in the blank. This is like Atari Mad Libs, right? And Nolan's Atari also piloted the company into the living room, right, with creating the Atari 2600 or the VCS. And that became a template for the modern consoles and kicked off really the modern video game industry and a little bit of an arms race. And I also believe, is this your first time at Portland Retro Gaming Expo?
I don't know. I've been to a lot of them, so they
Possibly.
They kind of merge and blur, and you know, one of the problems with Alzheimer's is you meet new people and you go new places.
Always. Awesome. Well, we're super glad to have Nolan here. This is awesome. It's such a treat and such an honor. Also here with me is Ethan Stearns, who is Atari's VP of Games, and under his leadership, Atari has published a variety of new games for modern platforms across styles, genres that still embody the classic Atari spirit. And we got things like Yars Rising and Fatal Run 2089, Quam 2, Mr. Run and Jump, which is totally amazing, right? And the Atari Recharge series, and lots more. Atari.com, check them out, buy a bunch of games. Chris Kohler is the editorial director of Digital Eclipse, which is also owned by Atari. And he heads up our in-house, yes, big.
Yes.
There you go. That's DE energy right there.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah, that's what they're applauding for.
That's awesome. What Chris and his team have done is really pioneered this interactive documentary style of, it's really a genre at this point, right? And in which the stories of gaming history are told in a player-controlled, interactive setting, right? It comes to life on the screen, and you get to play through that history. And he's worked on critically acclaimed titles like Atari 50, the anniversary celebration, which you all should buy if you haven't already bought it, and titles for our Digital Eclipse's Gold Master series, The Making of Karateka and Lama Soft, the Jeff Minter story. And we could just stop right there, but I'm Tim Lapetino. I'm the creative director at Atari. I'm the author of some books like one you might have heard of, Art of Atari. And I finally snuck up and joined the mothership. So it is really my pleasure here. I get to lead the design group at Atari and get to work with all of these fine people. So, but that's not really why you're here. You're really here for us to have a conversation about Atari, past and present. So, Nolan, I kind of want to start with you. You know, the early...
You can't start... We got a whole slide presentation.
Well,
I
was going to go through the slides. All right.
What in the name of Charles Entertainment Cheese is going on here? Who is running this
He
show?
was totally waiting just to say that. All right, so let me walk through. All right, would you like to start on our slides?
Yeah. Well, you already very ably introduced Atari 50th Anniversary Celebration. This is what I really wanted to get to because we hadn't actually told anybody this yet. But this year, Atari 50 was actually recognized in the Guinness World Records Gamers Edition, the real Guinness World Records book, for being the first interactive game documentary. So we're really excited to. We wanted to share that with you guys today because, like. We got a Guinness World Record. My mother is very proud. Let's do it.
Still.
Yes, that was it.
That's awesome.
Oh yeah, and we're gonna sell it. We're gonna sell you the game again. There's a new version. That's coming out in November. We've had a ton of stuff. There's 2 new interactive historical timelines, lots of great interviews with some folks that have been in the previous version and brand new folks. Evelyn Cito, actually, I love this interview. She was the one who worked with, so George Opperman designed the Atari Fuji logo, and Evelyn actually, as a junior graphic designer, inked the original logo, and then she went on, to do a whole bunch of great stuff with Atari's graphic design and stuff like that. It's a really fascinating interview. It's in, if you have the original version, it's downloadable content, but we're going to have the Atari Anniversary Celebration Expanded Edition, which is going to pull together the original game, the patch, all the downloadable stuff, tons of video. There's almost 150 games in there, and a replica of Al Alcorn's Syzygy business card is actually in the Steelbook edition for the Switch.
And the number still works, right?
And it's, you can just give him a call. And this is actually, the funny thing is that I kind of wanted to share is that it's photocopied off of the card that Al gave to me over 20 years ago at Classic Gaming Expo in Las Vegas. And so we wanted to, and there, all the other stuff included with the Steelbook as well. So please, if you bought the game, please buy it again. Thank you.
And that Syzygy logo was done by Ted Dabney. With his,
Yes. Yeah.
Well, Nolan, we wanted to start by jumping in the DeLorean and going back in time video-wise here. We got a little bit of clip, and I wanted to play it, and then I'm going to ask you some questions about it. So this is you.
Well, I'd say 30 years to pretty much the present. The arcades have been relegated to the back rooms and the side streets, and generally been an unsavory type of place. What we want to do is bring the amusement game to age. If we can give it a new zip and a pizzazz, it's going to be financially successful, as well as, I think, a very serious part in the leisure time activity of the American people.
The marriage of traditional pinball machines and computer technology has resulted in the birth of a new breed of amusement games. And Nolan Bushnell is the man handing out the cigars.
So you're handing out cigars. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about cigars. Let's talk about that freewheeling spirit, like this sort of idea of entertainment. Because you weren't just talking about video games. You were talking about entertainment at a larger scale. You talked a lot about this idea of innovative leisure. Yeah. Tell us about that. Where did that come from?
Well, I felt that what was going on in San Francisco with the hippie movement, we all had our hippie costumes that we'd dress up and we'd go up to San Francisco and hang out at Haight-Ashbury and things like that. And one of the ethos at that time was don't trust anyone over 30, And, it's Summer of Love and all that. And it was just a very, everybody wanted to reinvent what was, because there was a lot of dissatisfaction with the government and the Vietnam War and things like that. And so my version of that was I wanted to create the ultimate meritocracy, that if you become a meritocracy, what you wear to work, how you wear to work, if you go to work, doesn't matter. It focuses totally on outcomes. And when you do that, it essentially gets rid of racism, sexism, everything. And I'm very, very proud of the manifesto that I created, and I just read it again a couple of weeks ago. I'm writing an autobiography of Atari, incidentally, so it'll be out next year sometime, probably. But we really created the blueprint for the way Silicon Valley operated. And the meritocracy, I think, was really an important part of that. When I first moved to Silicon Valley, I was an engineer and we were professionals. And so we wore a white shirt and a tie to work every day. And, you know, that really sucks. And so we did that change, and Steve Jobs worked for me, and he took that to Apple, and pretty soon everybody looked around and said, gee, you know, this dressed-down style, this casual meritocracy way of looking at things works for Apple, works for Atari, and it was like it was a good idea that was like a virus. It infected everybody.
Yeah, and it wasn't just casual, right? You guys the real focus was on, you said outcomes, but also creativity. Like, what were some of the things that you did, and why was that important? Because it wasn't just about the bottom line. Like, you're a creative person. How did you sort of turn that from an idea into a culture?
Communication is, and you know, my first book, Finding the Next Steve Jobs, was all about how you create a creative culture. And most vertically integrated corporations are there to say no. And you have to learn how to say yes and to test, because that can be the only true merit or determination. And so we tried to say yes a lot. But the thing that I think was revolutionary that we did, and I did it almost on a lark, but we used to have these creative sessions at Bahara Dunes. And we'd rent a couple of houses, and it was a kind of a crazy place with the houses were all weird, architecturally strange. And we basically make lists of games that we thought were interesting. And then half hour before lunch, I'd say, okay, now we've got a whole list of games that we think are going to be cool. Now I want you to give me a list of games that are just batshit crazy. And so all of a sudden, and I'd say, and you know, the crazier the better. You're going to get, you know, tested or scored based on how crazy they are. And so we'd get 10, 20 games that were just, you know, a paragraph things. Then after lunch, I'd turn it upside down and say, okay, now we have to build one of the games off of the crazy list. Which one's it going to be? Or which two of them is it going to be? And this is about how to trick your mind. When you're looking for games that sort of fit the standard, you're figuring out how things can work. When you think of crazy ones, you're focused on things that you think can't work. Well, if all of a sudden the things that you think can work, you're challenged to say, which one of these can we make work? And your brain turns around, and I can say that the big wins that Atari had came from the lazy work, from the crazy work, the list. And so thinking outside the box, thinking outside the world, thinking of the crazy is oftentimes the pathway to true innovation.
That's awesome. That's super cool. And the idea that you built a framework instead of just being a free-for-all, right? The idea that you let people be creative, but then you zeroed in, because at the end of the day, you're a manufacturing company, right? You have product, you have to sell it, you have to make it. Now, in sort of transitioning from, the blue sky to the practical, were you really specific about how that worked, or did you just model it? I'm very curious about the creative culture, and how did you, was that just hey, this felt right, this feels like this works, and sometimes it didn't, sometimes it did? How did you rein that in a little bit?
When you have a factory, the engineers that are associated with that factory have to come up with stuff to keep the lines full. And I felt that I had to have something more than that. And so the engineers associated with the factory are thinking 3 months, 6 months ahead. I wanted a group that would think about games a year and a half, 2 years ahead. And that's where a couple of my best engineers decided they didn't like the rat race of Silicon Valley. And so they wanted to go up north, and we set up a research facility at Grass Valley. Of course, Grass Valley gave us the reputation of being a bunch of potheads, but it was actually a different thing. Not entirely, but Larry Emmons and Steve Mayer, two brilliant creative guys, basically focusing a year or more out, came up with such things as the 2800 or 2600, Touch Me, the game that turned out to be, Simon, because Ralph Baer stole it, but that's another story. And just the driving game, that came from that Night Driver, that all came from Grass Valley. So having this ability to have different challenges to different groups of technical people, I think is a good way to run a company. We had so much cool things going, and the dickheads from Warner just screwed it all up.
Well, before we run to that, I wanted to ask one more question about that. Right. See what he just teed that one up. You see that? But every time you guys were doing something, whether it was in coin-op and you're thinking about industrial design, or how are people going to interface with cabinets, what should those look like, or you're talking about home consoles with the Atari 2600, you're always breaking new ground, and it seems like sort of what you're talking about is you set up a framework, you didn't set up a list of this is how we will make this thing, right? It was an idea of how do we approach the next thing? And that's one of those things that doesn't change, right? Now, I want to fast forward, let's skip past Warner for a second. Those, that idea of prepping your team for what is next, how do you attack creative problems? When you've been involved, both on the inside and outside of modern Atari, when you look at what we're trying to do today, what do you see do you see some of that similarity? What do you see that's similar? What do you see that's different in that sort of approach of teaching people how to attack the creative problems?
Today, it's really, really, really hard because there's so much noise out there, so many titles, so much, it's just, how do you get lost? How do you stand out? And these conventions are actually quite an important part because you have like-minded people getting together for a celebration of a art that is it's retro, but it's also new, and that's really a hard thing to navigate.
Yeah.
And I just really think what Atari's doing now. I mean, I like to say that whenever you start a company, it's like one of your children, and you love it when your kids grow up to be strong and capable, and you feel bad when they get married to a douchebag. And so so right now, there's a guy named Fred Chesney that if you ever wanted to have a rag picker douchebag, I shouldn't do that. I'll probably get sued sometime. But he could not have been more disingenuous to the Atari brand. It was just horrible. And now Wade Rosen and the team he's got together, they really encapsulate a lot of the early emoji of Atari. And so I'm very, very happy to be you know, on the advisory board and helping them. Of course, I've always got full of some crazy ideas. Like, I've been trying to push them to do a series of Atari board games, and I've even designed a few of them, but so far, nobody home. But we'll get there.
He was looking right at you, Ethan.
We just put a card game out, I think,
Yes,
last week, didn't we?
That is true. Well, Ethan, I want to rope you into this. Like, you know, hearing what, you know, Nolan was saying about Atari's origins and this sort of approach, like, you know, nostalgia but future, how does that connect with the things that you're doing with your team today in Atari's games?
Yeah, I think it's a really big challenge because there's so much respect that we have to first bring to anything that we're making, and there's so much history there. But we can't just live in the past. Like, we can't. We do want to celebrate the past and in a lot of ways enable things. So I think like what the hardware team is doing with like the 2600 plus or the 7800 plus, giving ease of access to those collectors, you know, engaging with the homebrew community to try to grow that. I think it's part of reaching backwards and celebrating and preserving, you know, what people love about Atari. But I think something you had said that really resonates with me is the identity of Atari kind of innovating, always like being the future. Like, to me, the Fuji logo reminds me of future. And I think because of that, we can't only look backwards. We have to look forward, and we have to make games and bring our brand into the current state of the video game market. But it is noisy. It is difficult to stand out. And so we really try to rely on our identity and our brand. And right now, you know, how retro is an important concept to a lot of people. And working with studios like Digital Eclipse, working with studios like Night Dive, who are the best in the world at bringing, we think are the best in the world, at bringing that retro experience to a modern platform, to creating a modern experience with those games. We think that's great, and so there's a lot of investment in doing that. But then we're also experimenting and trying to find new games like Mr. Run and Jump, where that started as a homebrew title, and we loved it so much that we wanted to make a modern version of that game. And we have to continue to make those modern titles to stay relevant. And it sounds crazy to say, but when I came to the studio 3 years ago, the idea of Atari being about video games was not common. I mean, almost anyone I would talk to knew Atari as a brand. Everybody. It's a pop culture
T-shirts.
brand. T-shirts, yeah. But there's something that they attach to that. There's a love, a passion, an identity that everyone in the world, I think, associates with Atari. And I think that being associated with games has slowly been lost, and it's something that I'm very passionate about trying to bring back. And I know Wade is very passionate about trying to bring back.
Yeah.
Right. And the power of the homebrew community can't be understated.
I agree.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk more about that in a minute, but Chris, while we're talking about the history, I want to talk more about like the Digital Eclipse approach, because obviously, you know, the history of Atari is pretty well documented at this point. I mean, obviously, we're waiting for a book from Nolan to, like, you know, give us everything, right? And that's right. You're gonna spare no details, right?
Not sure. Well, you know, I have to be a little tiny bit careful because, you know, I had a run-in with the Me Too movement several years ago. And, you know, what was going on in the 70s is not appropriate for today, some would say. Or today's not appropriate. I think that it'd be a lot better off if it was more like the 70s today without all this horse shit. But that's...
I got nothing on that one. Chris, let's talk.
Digital Eclipse.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, so, right. So, I mean, fundamentally, it's like, what we were founded on was this idea that, you know, classic video games need to be treated with more respect, right? And what does that mean? That means, you know, accurately presenting them as they were. But additionally, it really means if you take a older video game and you just sort of put it in front of a modern audience and you don't add any context and you don't talk about where did this game come from? Who made this? Where were they when they made it? What year was it when this came out? If you don't have any of that information now, you just lose so much of it's impossible to expect somebody, I think, sometimes to be able to appreciate that game for what it is and really even have fun with it. And so, you know, when we were doing Atari 50, I mean, you notice we sort of pointedly did not call it a collection. You know, that was the sort of like, don't say, that was the taboo buzzer got buzzed on you if you said collection while we were making it, because we needed to move away from that concept of the retro collection, right? So, and really the other thing we believe is, having done this now, that the interactive medium of the video game itself is actually the best way to tell the stories of video game history. And so the way that all kind of works together is just this idea that, again, rather than just sort of give you a list of, you know, because everybody's sort of played in like an Atari collection where it's like you start the game up and then it's like, okay, here's your list of games. And it's like, okay, all right, Asteroids, Astro Blast, Astro Smash, Astro Grover, Astro this. And it's like, and it's all alphabetical order. And it's like, and literally the game is just telling you, like, you remember Atari, right? Pick a game and just start playing it. Well, you know, eventually we're going to run out of people that remember, you know, exactly what it was like to play the Atari 2600. So it's like, how do we bring in that new audience? And so, you know, what we kind of landed on with Atari 50 was the idea that, no, we're not just dumping you into a list of games. We're starting you with, you know, that, you know, the full-length version of that video that you saw is one of the first things you get to in Atari 50. And you get there before you even get to a playable gaming experience. And so the idea is that when you play Pong, you know, when you get to Asteroids, you understand that these games were made by people. They were made by certain people living in certain times,
like
and
the
they
70s.
were made exactly right. And so and they were the product of a certain culture, and so we want to show all of that so that when you do get to that point, you appreciate it more. And yeah, and you know, it's like, Tim, you're right. Yes, the history of Atari has been well documented, but that doesn't mean that everybody knows it. In fact, most people just don't. You know, they're not nerds like us in this room who like grew up like reading, you know, books about, you know, video games and reading game magazines and watching YouTube videos about it. And so you kind of have to assume that, like, and again, like, that's what really motivates me. I mean, I spent a long time in the media and I just loved telling the stories of gaming history. And to get to do that like in a video game, well, first of all, you can't really go on at length. You can't go on book length and have somebody literally read a whole bunch of text, you know? So you have to really carefully think about what you're presenting. But that's what really motivates me, you know, to try to do a great job with these. Is this might be the first time somebody is really seeing the story of video game history, but then we get to do it in an interactive way. And it's almost like just rewatching the Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, right? And when he, you know, beams the bar of chocolate across through television right before he, you know, messes that kid up, you know, he you know, sends the chocolate over, and then it's like, well, take it. And it's like, that's exactly what we want to do. It's you're watching a documentary about video game history, and then it's like, okay, now play the game. Haven't figured out how to get them to eat chocolate, you know, in real life yet, but we can say, play the game. Now try it. Test it out, and now go back to the documentary. And to give that kind of a rich experience, I think, like, that's the way to do video game history.
Right, and it allows people to make that emotional connection to those games, right?
Yes.
Which, whether they grew up with them or they didn't.
Yep. Once you know who made it, and once you have that perspective of that human, you know, behind the game, I think that when you finally see it and you know about the blood, sweat, and tears that went into it, and you understand, like, well, why was it made like that? I hope that you would have just more of an appreciation for it. And that's how, that's how we can create new fans of this stuff and keep it going.
Yeah, I want to talk about keep it going. I want to go back to something you said, Nolan. You know, I think it was 1979, like you were quoted as saying, you know, people were talking about the 2600, the the reception at first wasn't super strong, right? And you were like kind of ready to move on. Like, okay, well, that's what we do. We innovate, we do other things. But now fast forward, out there, if you walk down the hall, there are people making new games for the Atari 2600. People have been making games for the Atari 2600 for 20 years now. Fans have we sort of look at them as kind of keeping that, the flame alive a little bit. How does that strike you as somebody who's like, hey, I'm always thinking about the next thing, I'm always innovating? What do you think about the fact that people have sort of landed on this particular product, this particular, style of game? Like, how does that strike you in 2024?
Baffling. Well, no. See, I felt that we always had to innovate, even if it meant devouring our previous babies. And that I think that had I not sold to Warner, the destruction of 1983 would not have happened. I think I would have had the 5200 was actually not a great game player, and the controls were just a jock. But it was unconscionable to me that Nintendo came along and took the crown for years and years, and that should have been Atari's, And the other thing that really grinds my gears was we have the fastest modems in the world. And say, well, why that? Well, we were actually looking for low latency modems, and they just turned out to be faster, and we broke all the rules of modems, and they ended up being sold to U.S. robotics, but we were going to do a game network that you dial a local telephone number, which was toll-free, and then and you dial into a closet that maybe had 50 or 100 modems that would be all constructed together, and then we'd link the closets together with T1 lines. That's a little inside technical baseball. But I actually believe that if we'd have started that game network, Atari would have owned the internet.
AtariNet.
AtariNet. But then Al Gore came in and did it. But you put me in the DeLorean, and so I just like to reminisce on that. I mean, we had this thing called AtariTel. Remember that one?
Yeah.
And we had some really cool stuff. My theory was, if you want to live in the future, you want to invent it.
So what advice would you give for us, and anybody really? Like, okay, modern Atari, we're trying to live in the future, but also trying to take care of the past. Like, you didn't have any history that you had to service, right? Because you're just plowing through, right? Yeah. What advice would you give to Ethan and Chris and the rest of our team in terms of that juggling act?
I think they're doing a great job of juggling, and I think it's the right thing. You want to push forward, but you want to be respectful. A few years ago, I did a VR Pong game, and it was fun, where you basically were running back and forth in VR, and you were the paddle. And we had a 2-bit circus.
I did it with you.
That's right.
Way back in the day, before I worked at Atari.
Yeah, and it was fun.
It was great.
Yeah, and I understand that the Quest 2 is going to come out for $300, and so I feel like we need to grab hold of that puppy and really go for it to VR, and it's VR and AR. AI is a little better because you don't get motion sickness, and we've got a lot of great IP that can go into that world seamlessly. And I think that with a $300 headset, it's going to be a market that we should go after. But
It's funny, there's a lot of talks about VR during this show, which I didn't think was going to be a show we'd be talking a lot about VR, but it's come up quite a bit.
Well, you know, there's another thing that I've been trying to wrap my head around. Telegram has published some APIs for gameplay on their network platform. And you know, Telegram is where all the crypto guys hang out. And so I feel like, and the games that they've got there are just batshit poor. Does anybody like any of the games that, have anybody got engaged in that? Pretty bad, huh? So I feel like, you know, that's a big, big marketplace. You know, there's a lot of people there. And so if we could figure out some games that are fun and charge them in crypto, I think we could make a real bundle.
So
Anyway.
crypto and VR, all right.
All right,
I'll
you
write
guys
it down.
heard it here. Write that down. Nolan said crypto and VR.
So here's the challenge. Figure out a way to do that, and we'll figure out a way to fund you.
All right.
I do think that, again, like the idea of reaching forward and trying to innovate, and we have these very powerful IPs, and a lot of those IPs are built off of very simple gameplay concepts.
Yeah.
And we see the success of Recharge in this, the Recharge games in this way, being able to bring them to new platforms and in new ways. And I think that is something that we need to continue to chase as we see games. Because for me, I love games so much, and I think most of this audience loves games, but not everyone does, and not everyone feels like they have access to games or that they understand that they can play them. And so as these new platforms develop and we can reach further to new audiences, in a way I look at that as our responsibility to try to build game experiences for those audiences as in a lot of different directions, VR, AR, cloud gaming, a lot of places like that.
Yeah, and you know, people talk about the game business, but there's really game businesses, and they're quite separate and different. For example, there's the 3-minute experience that was classic in coin-op, you know, where you kind of did it, and, you know, when we started Pong, the first thing that we discovered is that the gameplay was too long. And so we, after X number of volleys, we sped the ball up, and still playing too long. And so then we cut the paddle in half, you know, just to hit the less than 3-minute threshold, which was necessary. Cell phone games, touchscreen. You know, the problem with cell phones is that it's very hard to get a vector, you know, environment. You know, it's basically a touchscreen, and you know, you can swipe on a touchscreen, but it's not very satisfying. And then we have the games that you play for hours and days and weeks, you know, with teams and on the net. That's a whole different genre, first-person shooters, what have you. And then we have just the short burst, you know, games that are puzzles and keeps your brain sharp, and Wordle and what have you. And so we have this opportunity to niche it to death in some ways. And with the IP that Atari has, a lot of it fits into a lot of these constructs very, very seamlessly and powerfully. And the fact that it's in a new network and to a new piece of hardware, that's just icing on the cake.
Yeah, that's great. Well, let's do one more question. So let's get back in the DeLorean. Let's go forward 50 years. So we'll have an old Chris and an old Ethan up here in a panel in 50 years, and people saying, "Oh, what did you do? You know, let's look back on Atari." Nolan, what would you say?
Barry Nolan, for sure.
You said it. I didn't say that.
Be like a robot of some sort.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, it'll be AI Nolan. Right.
Have any of you read The Dodge in Hell from Neil Stephenson? No. That's where I'll be.
So the 50 years from now, what do you see? What would you hope that Atari would see? And then I ask you guys, where would you like to be, like 50 years from now?
I would, if medical science can keep me alive for another 50 years, I would love to be interviewed for Atari 100, the anniversary celebration by Digital Eclipse.
I mean, I don't know, like where creativity and where games will be at that time, but I know Atari will be there. Like, Atari's come this far, it will continue. So I think I'm not really trying to take Atari to that location in 50 years as much as like along the way. I just want to be making sure we're doing the right thing year over year and making sure we're present for each evolution of interactive entertainment.
I think that when I see the future, I see similar to Ready Player One, where we're constantly in this environment. But in my version of the future, Nolan is not the bad guy.
You might not be in control of that.
That's great. All right, you guys, we're out of time.
We're way over time.
All right.
Yeah.
We're only 5 minutes over time.
So here's the thing. So Nolan is going to be doing a autograph signing down in the Atari booth down on the show floor. And we are going to walk with him down to the Atari booth now. So please let us do that.
Yes. So please, if you guys would go when you guys exit, you can go ahead. And they're already working on line management. So if you do want to, please, Nolan will be signing.
There's line management? Is there code there?
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Thank you, guys.
I hope so.
That's great.
I'm sorry.
No, it's awesome.
Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and here are a few more videos for you to check out.